All right, joining us now, Congressman, Republican 7th District of Virginia, Dave Brat. And Dave having some great Memorial Day messages, as we just heard from President Trump. Congressman, Dr. Brat, good to have you with us. Happy Memorial Day.
Hey, happy Memorial. Yeah, great to be out with our heroes all weekend. So it's great. Thank you, John.
What were some of the things that you were seeing, and as you were out talking to people, what are people saying, Congressman, about what's going on? Is there a consistent theme?
Yeah. I mean, there is. Everyone just comes up and says, keep fighting, Dave. They know there's major problems up there. And I think that Trump hit it, about right with this swamp theme, right? Everybody knows it's out of control. And then the media, the mainstream media, is trying to play it like it's Trump's fault, right? Like he's responsible for $100 trillion problem and a weakened military and weakness around the globe. And the average person back home knows that's not true. This has been with us for 10 years minimum. And so kids keep fighting because everybody knows the country's on the line, right? Their kids' futures are on the line. The debt is on the line. National security's on the line. So everybody, they just hey, keep fighting. I like what you're doing, Dave. They see you on TV and stuff. I like what you're saying. And that's the most of the comments I've been getting.
Keep fighting. The number one thing. I've probably said that this weekend to 100 people. Just people
Right.
that ask me, tell me what's going on. It's like, you got to keep fighting. Because what the other side wants us to do is just tuck tail and say we just had enough, walk away, and then they win. Right? That's exactly
That's
it.
right. And our side, I mean, it's always, I always call our side like the Cub Scouts, right? I mean, the D's are in lockstep. They come out after you. They got the mainstream media, and our guys just aren't used to it. And I don't mean fight in the street fight sense. I just mean standing for principle when I say that fight. And it's important to do that. But we back off on our principles when we negotiate. They have 8 votes in the Senate we need. We have the House, the Senate, the presidency, all the executive branches, all the secretaries, all everything. And it's like their 8 votes in the Senate outweighs everything we fought for to win all these elections, not to mention the state houses across 50 states in the nation. And so our people expect us to hold firm to what we said we were going to do, and that we got to do better at that.
Like you said, you got 8 people. Why does the minority in the Senate seem to the average person like they're running the country? When the Republicans had the minority in the Senate, they didn't do crap. Why is it now? Why does it seem to people like Chuck Schumer basically drives policy in the government? Why is that?
Well, I mean, the answer is always follow the money, right? And so in D.C., both sides are locked into promises across the board, and not all of them are bad, right? Funding for the military, education, transportation, science, education, everything, right? So you're locked into all these constituencies, and unfortunately, we're spending $4 trillion a year and only raising about $3 trillion. And that's a bad habit we've got into. And so our guys too often want to make a deal with the other side just to keep the gravy train running. And if you don't do that, then the left, the mainstream media just screams at you, how can you be so cruel to cut spending when we've already bankrupted the nation? And our kids are going to have a very hard time in their futures. And that's in law, right? I mean, we know that. And so if you follow the money, that's the number one explanation for about everything up there. So we'll use those 8 senators as an excuse. Hey, we can't get our budget through unless we get those 8 votes. When we have so much leverage, and the Democrats need so much from us as well, that we can have plenty of deals, and you can be bipartisan and let them have a few wins that represent the size of their minority, but not the size of the majority.
I think that's exactly it. It's a game that's being played, and it's, again, people that don't want to go on the record in making the tough decisions. We've been saying this for some time, and it continues to happen. I want to get, Congressman, on Sunday night, the State Department, very quietly, very secretly, rescinds President's executive order reducing the number of refugees annually that can come into the United States. It was 110,000. Trump made it 50,000 for 120 days. Now that expired. And the State Department very subtly and quietly sends an email out to all the refugee advocacy groups saying, we no longer have to abide by these quotas. We're going to open it back up and get the numbers back up. When you look at this, people feel disenfranchised. It's like, okay, we voted for Trump. This was one of the keys of his platforms. He did the 120-day reduction. It expires. Nobody does anything. And the State Department basically acts on their own, rescinds it, and now the numbers start flowing in again, which is the exact opposite of why this is a big issue of why people voted for Trump. So can you understand that people are just feeling disenfranchised? Like it doesn't really matter what they do. The government is going to do whatever the government does.
Yeah, well, and it's that's our problem is that it all relies on our president, and he's fighting all fronts, right? He's overseas realigning our foreign policy with NATO, and he basically achieved that. And he basically realigned our policy with the Middle East and Israel and Palestine and the Saudis, the Sunnis versus the Shia. And he basically achieved that. And so there's some big wins, but then it is a huge burden. And so on the immigration, that's one of his biggest promises is on immigration. And unfortunately, we haven't done a good enough job showing the average American what Sweden looks like right now and what Germany and France looks like right now and London, right? And it's not immigration. It's out-of-control immigration policy, right? Mm-hmm. Illegals flooding into certain zones that the police won't even go into in Europe. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to replicate that. And so that's the issue, right? And we haven't educated the average person what this means. When you go back to the same old patterns, you're going to end up in some bad patterns that Europe is already living through. And it's all, I mean, everybody just go Google, right? Just go Google Germany immigration. And you'll see horror story after horror story. And then they, of course, have more homegrown terrorism going on, by the week now. And so we've been very lucky. We have very good professionals working for us on that. But that immigration issue is huge, and it's been spun by the left that, we don't want immigration, and that's crazy. I got people from all over the world living in my neighborhood, right? And I worked at the World Bank. I love the whole cosmopolitan feel of that. But it's got to be done well, and it's got to be organized, and it's got to be legal, and it's got to be fair to the American taxpayer. And so a lot of people voted for Trump on that set of issues, and so we're going to keep fighting on it.
Well, none of that is happening right now because you look at this and you basically say, okay, the bureaucrats in the State Department who want to increase the number of refugees that come in, as soon as the order expires, they send out a memo and ask for bigger numbers. So it's like they didn't get the memo on November 8th. They don't buy into Trump's agenda, and they just do whatever they want. And I don't know if you call that the deep state or just the state of the bureaucracy that we have in these entrenched people. And yeah, I think Trump is finding out that it is much more difficult to change the status quo in Washington than he hoped. Am I right? I mean,
yeah. Well, and it's not just the State Department. It's the State Department. It's the United States Chamber of Commerce. It's most all big business. It's the agriculture industry. Anyone that needs labor, right? And so there's a big lie that circles that says that our GDP growth is a function of two things: population growth and productivity. And so people are basically stating a lie. They say if you bring in more people, that's good for economic growth. Well, and that is so misleading. You, of course, will have more economic growth because you bring in another person, right? So you got another worker, displacing an American worker. But the problem is it all hinges on productivity growth. You can bring in another person, but if they don't earn more and produce more than the government provides them, then the taxpayer's on the hook, and that's what's going on. And so people don't care about whether the country grows, right, by another few dollars. They care about what happens to my paycheck at the end of the week after taxes and after I pay education bills.
Right.
And when I see my schools being flooded, my hospitals being flooded, and et cetera, and I'm not getting any services. And everybody knows that intuitively. But the big elites, they're putting on the all-court press saying, oh, all the economists say you got to bring in more labor to help economic growth, and that's one of the biggest lies of our time. No one cares about GDP. They care about GDP per capita after taxes and transfer payments, and what they're left with at the dinner table every night for their kids.
Bingo. There it is right there. People care about how much money is in their pocket, in their household, and that's the bottom line. And so we got the cheap labor crowd basically putting falsehoods out there in order to somehow say because we bring additional people in that are willing to work for minimum wage or under, that somehow that's helping the economy. Total lie. I couldn't agree more with that. Healthcare. Another week goes by. No action in the Senate. I had Senator Mike Lee on a few moments ago. He seemed confident that something would get done over the summer. I don't see how they're going to get anything done, but Senator Lee seemed pretty optimistic that, and he said that he personally was working feverishly on a bill. But you know what's going to happen, right? Whatever it is, you're going to get 3 Republicans that are going to bail, Susan Collins, somebody else, and somebody else, and then you're going to get back to the same deal. What are the chances we actually get something done this summer, Dave Brat?
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing to me, right? I always hear about playing team ball and being on the Republican team and whatever, and the elites come down on you and say, look, it doesn't matter what's in the bill, just pass it, right? Until that logic hits the Senate. The elite of the elite of the elites, right? The guys with the exception of Mike Lee and a few others, right? They're always having, tea parties or whatever, a very sophisticated group of forward thinkers. And the elites will come down on everybody except for the U.S. senators. When they do nothing, right? They've got no work product after 7 years of repeal language, no work product ready to go. Now we're going to wait through the summer, right? And then you wait a little longer, and then they're going to say, well, now it's a political cycle. We can't pass it now. And we've seen that game over and over and over. So this summer is not good enough for me. They've had 7 years, and all of our business leaders that put pressure on the House need to put pressure on the Senate. And it's shocking how that's not happening because we have to pass health care before we get to taxes and all that. And so we need the whole country needs to come down on the Senate and say, do what you said you were going to do, keep your word, keep your promises, and let's go. Right? I don't care what it looks like within a range, but get it done.
Well, they're not going to get it done. I mean, that's the whole point of this matter is, Mike Lee's on my show saying what he's going to get done and how feverishly they're working on it. But, I mean, the question I should have asked now that I think of it is, well, what have you been doing for the past 84 months? Right? Nothing? Right. I mean, why isn't this thing ready to go? And then he blasted the House bill and saying, well, that came here, that's dead on arrival, so we basically have to redo it. Well, then why don't you try to redo that in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16? You had 7 years. Like you say, they've done nothing.
Yeah, and while we're working on our bill, right? Why didn't, I mean, it just, we put ours together. I wasn't particularly happy with it. They blopped it down on us with 3 weeks to vote on it, right? And so the Senate, they can get it done if they choose to, but it's all politics right now. It's not policy. It's all politics. Everyone's posturing and scared of the next vote while the current healthcare system is imploding.
Right.
Before our eyes. I mean, it is imploding. And so we better get it straight.
All right, so what happens in the interim? Let's speculate here for a second, Congressman. And I know as a sitting congressman, you're not in the business of hypothesis or speculation, but some of this is real. So Aetna just pulled out of Virginia. If you live in the state of Iowa, you don't have any exchanges. Everybody's out. New Hampshire, they've only got one. Massachusetts has got one. These are dwindling. So in the interim between the Congress and the Senate passing something, what happens if Obamacare just ceases to be there? What happens?
Yeah, well, Obamacare affects, about 11 million people. The individual markets, 175 million are still on employer-provided plans that are affected by the regulations in Obamacare. And so that 11 million, that piece is imploding, and it could go up to 20 million. And so that we're going to have to deal with, right? We're going to have to find these folks a solution that works in the short run while we fix Obamacare and at least take care of the thing. But, I mean, it is just amazing. They asked Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, about, how do you explain these massive price increases in insurance companies saying they're going to drop out in 2016? Mm-hmm. And without pausing, he said, well, President Trump hasn't supported this at all. And, Obamacare. And then the news reporter said, Senator Durbin, with all due respect, I asked you about the failures in 2016 before he became president. Right? And so, I mean, it shows you the degree of politics involved here. The system was imploding prior to 2017. The Democrats are blaming it on President Trump. And the logic, anyone could see the logic. It's going to fail. Socialism always fails, right? You run out of other people's money. That's the long-standing phrase that goes back to probably Thatcher. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. It only took 8 years for this one to show its signs of failure.
All right.
And so at some point, you got to line it up right with incentives and individual behavior, get individuals shopping with their own money again and bring down prices.
All right, Congressman, we got about a minute and a half. Final question. Let's get to Trump's overseas trip. Your general reaction, successful, unsuccessful, why?
Oh, hugely successful. I mean, he's realigning the Middle East in the first half, right? He goes to Saudi, it gets a tremendous welcome. And then Israel, he's got to maintain his strength on Israel. And then he's realigning the world against our major threat there, which is Iran. And so that's part one. And then part two, he goes to Europe, and that had a cooler feeling to it, rightly so, because he said, hey, some of you aren't even paying your 2%, right? Much less equal payments, right? We're 2% of small countries' GDPs just to pay their fair share. And, the UN doctrine is if anyone goes to war, we're behind them.
Right.
So they only have to pay 2% of a smaller economy, and they get U.S. protection under them. And then people critique us and say we're breaking up NATO. No, right? It's a deal. We pay the lion's share of that tab, and the smaller countries who are our friends and share our values, there's no doubt about that, but they're not paying their fair share, the 2% of a smaller economy.
Crazy.
And so it's like, come on. And then people say, well, I can't believe you're jeopardizing the post-World War II Bretton Woods liberal order of NATO and all that. It's been great success for us. Well, of course it has been. We paid the bill. Right? I mean, see, you can't make it up. And so we're asking the rest of our friends to ante up. We cannot any longer do it on our own. And we got 2 arms races now. You got a bullets arms race and you got a cyber arms race going hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And so it's time for everybody to chip in.
All right, so that's going to be the final word. We want to thank Congressman Dave Brat for being with us. Get more information. Sign up for his newsletter like we have. Don't miss out on that. Go to davebrat.com, davebrat.com. Congressman, always good to have you on, sir. Thanks for being with us. Happy Memorial Day to you and your family. Go to davebrat.com. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, John. God bless.